after the banking experience, after the Sunday, Tuesday was the day that I was going into Leeds. It was a day where in the afternoon I was going to spend it with Bob Mottram, and in the evening I was going to spend it with my father's cousins. My father has a bunch of cousins who stayed in Leeds, and I have second cousins who are their children, most of whom moved to London. So now when I go back to the UK, I make sure that if I can, I spend a bit of time in Leeds and I spend a bit of time in London. But spending time in Leeds this trip was to give me about 4 hours with Bob Mottram. And Bob Mottram worked on Noble Ape for about 3 years. But he's also someone who I've continued to follow after his work with me on Noble Ape, because I think he's a genuinely fascinating fellow. And he's also someone who has just a lot of similar insights. I feel when you put things out there, be they audio podcasts or artificial life simulations or whatever you want to put out there, you're effectively giving the opportunity for like-minded folk that are compatible with these ideas to come and, participate with you and talk to you and interact with you. In the case of Bob Mottram, the only time that I've spent with him physically was about 40 minutes in Manchester about 3 years ago now, where we had a very limited time. We went out for a greasy spoon meal. As I say, Bob is an amazing set of kind of juxtapositions. He's a traditionalist with regards to his food. He's very English and at so many different levels. Yet he has various kind of anarchist qualities and various other things, eclectic musical interests. So I know with regards to food where I can go with Bob Mottram. And this trip, thankfully, we found a pub that did a good fish and chips. We both kind of gravitated to the fish and chips. And Bob was drinking Guinness and I was drinking, I think, Diet Coke, which I don't normally drink, but in this circumstance I was drinking Diet Coke. And we finished off the afternoon with an orange juice each. But it was an opportunity to talk about so many different aspects of Noble Ape. And I don't have an opportunity to talk with really anyone about Noble Ape to the level and depth that I can talk with Bob about it. One of the projects that I floated with Bob that I've wanted to do, that I've actually started working on now and back in my home in San Jose, was to record 1,000 spoken words. There's a list of the top 5,000 words, and I was thinking of recording the first 1,000 of these words. I've recorded 500 as it is, but it's still perfectly enough. And the notion is that when you speak these words, you do a fast Fourier transform on it and analyze the underlying frequencies. And the frequencies of speech are things that you can then put onto the Noble Apes. Now, if you've ever heard Noble Ape speech, it's got a chirping sound. I think I put a Noble Ape speech in an Ape Reality podcast once, but as it is currently, it's very much chirping. It's not about throat, mouth, nose kind of interactions. But the plan is to take these audio sound bites, these words, do fast Fourier transforms on them, and then analyze what frequencies, what ideas in audio space and frequency space are necessary for spoken language. And I've actually started to do this work. It made me realize that there was a bug in the fast Fourier transform that I've been using for 3 odd years to just do inverse Fourier transforms, not to do regular forward Fourier transforms. So I've replaced the fast Fourier transform code, and I've been doing a lot of additional work just getting that stuff up to speed and working on that since I've been back. But in addition to this, we talked about the programmable notion of beauty, that rather than beauty being a kind of defined attribute, beauty being something that can be programmed within the language of society. Also, the notion of regional references of places. I think I've talked about this in prior Ape Reality recordings, but the notion of territories and the fact that groups of apes will have familiar names for places that other groups of apes might have different names for the same place, be it, a mountain peak, a valley, some, connection to the waterways. These kind of things would have common names in certain social groups because they're referenced within those groups. But as the groups change and different apes observing the same area might use different terms associated with it. We talked a little bit about the notion of a JSON server, which could be written originally in C. The Noble Ape simulation has object code which returns JSON output. But then that this could be moved to like Node.js or something, and then you'd have a Noble Ape server and a Noble Ape client, and the server would probably be written in Node with a JSON output, and the client would just get this JSON code and execute it accordingly. We talked a little bit about what grooming would look like in the city. So the Noble Apes as primates have grooming that they do to one another. But how can you take these things in the noble ape setting, in the ecological environment, and translate it to cityscapes? We talked specifically about grooming, but there are a few other things that the noble apes do organically that can translate to ideas in the city. We talked also about the newspaper narrative within the Mushroom Boy, the fact that there are competing narratives in the Mushroom Boy relating to the news media and whether the protagonist in the Mushroom Boy cultivates the news media or doesn't cultivate the news media, and the news media here can be independent as well. So there can be, far-right media that is against the Mushroom Boy and far-left media that is in favour of the Mushroom Boy, so to speak. Very briefly associated with the political ramifications of an urban terrorism simulator, talked a little bit about the Las Vegas shooting and how it changed a lot of my own thinking associated with the Mushroom Boy. We talked about ghosts and the notion of ghosts as a means of representing Dark Age religion. And I think this is something that really stuck with Bob, because he was certainly doing a lot of posts soon afterwards associated with what these ghosts mean in a social context. We also talked about abstracting the components of noble ape into a kind of abstract noble being or noble entity, and how that will map onto, the existing noble apes, what I'm calling the noble schmucks, which are the noble apes in the city, fierce felines, noble ghosts, all these things, how there are primitives which can be abstracted from the existing noble ape and, utilized in this way. And also we talked about language being imprecise, and that the way in which language is used, sometimes there is no agreement about the terminology, but sometimes it's just complete confusion. But this notion that meaning isn't always the purpose of language, and rather than being caught up in the notions of meaning in language, sometimes language is just about agreement or just happy that there is another creature there making noises. It was a wonderful time with Bob. I then went and spent an evening, like I said, with my father's cousins. I went to have a barber experience first. My grandfather, who passed away a number of years ago, and my great-uncle, who's still alive, were both barbers and both started being barbers in Leeds. So opposite the restaurant that I was meeting, I was there an hour early. I went over to the barber, and the barber only took 5 minutes. I had a wonderful conversation with the barber, but barbers in this part of the world are very, very fast. So then eventually my relations turned up, and it was just a wonderful evening of kind of storytelling and reflecting, and they dropped me at the train station. Got to the train station about, I think, 8:30, and ended up back in Wilmslow at about 10:30. So the train from Leeds, centre of town, onto Wilmslow, all very easy, and just a very nice day. Very nice day. Very bad weather, but very nice day. And it was wonderful in particular to spend a kind of cosy afternoon in some relatively generic pub talking with Bob Mottram about a variety of things.